Theaster's lecture tonight, Du Bois as the early social practitioner, is a meaningful way to continue the important cross-disciplinary conversations that began with the opening of the exhibition about a month ago and the symposium. On a personal note, I felt it was absolutely essential to have Theaster participate in Du Bois in our time. His art poetically and symbolically builds and bridges communities and recuperates neglected cultural history on a local, national, and international level. My thanks go to the Interdisciplinary Studies Institute, the ISI for their co-sponsorship of Theaster's lecture tonight and his visit today, and in particular my thanks to Stephen Klingman, the director of ISI. My thanks also goes to Mass Humanities and to the UMass Department of Architecture and Design for their support. Joseph Kuczynski, here to my right. Joseph's practice as an inspiring educator, a building designer, artist, and as somebody fully engaged in our local community. For those reasons, it's clear that he's the person to introduce Theaster to you tonight.
Thank you, Loretta, and thanks everyone for coming out today. In thinking about introducing Theaster Gates, and today spending the day with him in a variety of different settings, one question that comes up for me is what to call him. So we have how to label him, and how does one finish the sentence, Theaster Gates is blank. So, and I realize it might be best to list the many ways that Theaster works, since the work that he does is very much defines who he is. So I decided to start this introduction with the sentence, Theaster Gates works as an artist, an urban planner, a sculptor, a musician, a developer, a community organizer, a cultural entrepreneur, an activist, a citizen artist, public intellectual, and most definitely a social activator. So Theaster's training as an urban planner and sculptor and subsequent time spent studying clay has given him a keen awareness of the poetics of production and systems of organizing. Playing with these poetic and systematic interests, Theaster has assembled gospel choirs, formed temporary unions, organized community dinners, and used systems of mass production as a way of exploring relationships between aesthetics, labor, and race. Through all his work, and this is something I got from today's roundtable, Theaster builds the mechanisms, the platforms, and the apparatus necessary to activate the imagination and transform spaces, institutions, traditions, and perceptions. Theaster's work is organized through three primary entities. One is he's the chairman of the Rebuild Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on cultural-driven redevelopment in under-resourced communities in Chicago, St. Louis, and Omaha. Another hat that he wears is as an academic administrator and the inaugural director of the Arts and Public Life program at the University of Chicago, which develops artist residence and university community collaborations with the African American community that is adjacent to the university. And lastly, he works as a prolific artist through his own studio practice. His recent exhibition and performance venues are incredibly varied and include Documenta 13 in Kassel, Germany, White Cube Gallery in London, the Whitney Biennial, the Armory Show in New York. Gates was also honored by the Wall Street Journal as Arts Innovator of the Year 2012 and was recently awarded the inaugural Verlis Center Prize for Art and Politics at the New School in New York, a prize that values Theaster's commitment to the question of how arts can advance social justice. I won't list all of Theaster's projects here, but briefly discuss one work that Theaster is well known for, which is his Dorchester project. This project transformed two formerly abandoned buildings on Chicago's South Side into alternative cultural spaces that house an art and architecture library, a slide archive, and the Black Cinema House, where programming highlights films by and about people of color. Using repurposed materials from all over Chicago, the aesthetic of Gates' Dorchester project is both practical and poetic. A do-it-yourself effort, but one that also is a political project. It bridges the creation of new art with the adaptive use of resources to create a multifunctional and growing space that supports community-driven initiatives and fosters neighborhood revitalization. It is a project that deploys a set of ideas for greater cultural and socioeconomic renewal. It is works like the Dorchester Project that make it very appropriate that Theaster is here at UMass as part of the programming for the exhibition Du Bois in Our Time. For similar to Du Bois, Theaster is an artist of many talents and with the ability to work in a variety of disciplines and realms, which, as I mentioned earlier, makes it difficult to define and label him. So I'll end this introduction doing something I find easy to do, which is describe some of the things that I believe Theaster does. So that he loves to make things, and some of those things have great beauty. That he catalyzes conversations and opens dialogue. That he creates spaces both thoughtful and visceral. That he develops critiques through collaboration. That he performs meaningful rituals. That he explores issues of race and culture with transformative depth. And that he possesses, as Du Bois did, the curiosity for what makes us human, and the discipline and passion to make that curiosity visible. It is really my great pleasure to welcome Theaster Gates.
I'm learning a lot about what it means to be in art school and what it means to have a burning desire to do something good and almost no way to access that burning desire. That the people I've encountered today are not short on passion and imagination, enthusiasm, but there is some interesting disconnects between even how institutions like UMass help to make the intellectual activity at the university one that has practical impact. And in some ways, I'm supposed to root the conversation in this notion of social practice, and so I'll critique social practice, and I'll talk about the university, and I'll talk about the failures of this moment in the United States, where the things that we've come to value are such, by and large, so wrong and complicatedly wrong, the things that we value. And so I'll talk a lot about the wrong things that I value, with the hope that they might resonate. But in the spirit of Du Bois, I thought that I would then make a speech. This is a speech. This is my first speech of many speeches to come. This speech is about the importance of being about something important. I am speeching. This speech is about speaking to you about Du Bois. It's about artists and notions of social practice, about Du Bois as a social practitioner and Du Bois as a social practice. The speech is about whether or not social practice is about something. This speech is attempting to ask art questions related to objecthood and non-objecthood. It calls into question whether or not I have the right to talk about anything except talking about things. The speech is almost about Du Bois, almost about his practice, but I couldn't get to his practice because I was preoccupied with my own. This speech is really about me, but I'm leaning on Du Bois to make myself heard. I am speaking through Du Bois. I'm speaking through me. Du Bois, the great social practitioner who was not named or appointed under this rubric of international engagement, but rather simply did what he was called to do. using tools available to him and beyond him. Today I talked a lot about being called to do things. Du Bois making the unreachable a question, the challenges of blackness, the souls of blacks, the gifts of blacks, amplified qualifiers of our right to be. His tools, the calling, the responding, the speaking, the willing things into being. He was usually just talking shit. Du Bois was called. I'm asking the question whether or not there is a need to call yourself something that relates to your calling. Like, does a preacher have to be known as a preacher, or could she just preach? Does the artist have to go on the record stating that their actions are calling into question things beyond art? Why do we have to talk so much when our calling is about our hands and our hearts? Is calling not about our action? But maybe this is the question. Maybe the challenge is the challenge of language. And so again, I lean on the speech. I lean on the turn of the century. I am trying to find the public intellectual that I will follow. I want to be discipled by the living, but I have to use books instead because I'm not sure if I believe that we believe anymore. That for some people's calling to be a public political act, that those radicals are often marginalized, that we'd rather know more about their love lives than their advocations, and that we strip the leaders of their masculinity often, their prowess, his or her prowess, because there's a way in which the world don't want folk to be way too smart about nothing. That maybe calling is also about listening. It is true that we are engaged in practices more complicated than the easel, sometimes. That for some, there is urgency to face certain life miseries. The artist is being called upon to respond to the challenges beset the nation because the nation is often too bureaucratic, too privatized, too stingy or ignorant to understand the complexity of sowing good seed. I'm imagining the need for social practice within the business school, the need for social practice within schools of architecture, design, medicine, law, economics. I'm imagining social practitioners scattered about the land who have training to combat racism and classism that looms just behind policies of land, health, and education. We need social practitioners everywhere. I said today in this roundtable that social practice can't be the end all. It can't be the end game. It shouldn't be the core. The core should be a real learning. Learning Mandarin or law or zoning policy. That maybe social practice was about something that we believe in, and that because we are called to do the things that we believe in, that maybe we would deploy the things we're good at toward the things that we believe in. But how do you deploy social practice? How is it that the artist has become the most useful agent for change? The brokest, the least informed. How is it that we end up accidentally doing more than the folk that are paid and made to do the changes that happen in the world? It's a shame that I would have to create Dorchester because there's not opportunity for artists to platform their lives. It's a shame that I would have to leave the studio to think about the economic injustices of black men and women around my house. Some days I would rather be making pots. And so there's this calling piece. So rather than arguing whether social practice is or isn't, what it is or isn't, that I'd much rather speak with faculty and students about, like, how do we learn to hear within ourselves what we're meant to do in the world? And how do we cultivate a way of hearing ourselves, or what art form, or what, a gallerist, that all the things that are drivers seem to be external drivers in this way, and the ones who seem to win, they win for a couple reasons. One, they're either really savvy at listening to the external drivers, and they leverage the external drivers, and the external drivers say, Jay-Z, you gotta start wearing suits. We gotta change your image, baby. This kind of gangster rap thing, you gotta kind of evolve from that. You're from that, that's great. You're from that, Jay-Z, you're really, but now it's really important that the world kind of recognizes you as a kind of a mogul of, of hip hop. I mean, you're the mogul of hip hop, and it's important that we kind of present you above, your colleagues, so that, as we're developing your brand, he's like, yeah, I'm a mogul. Yeah, mogul. You end up looking schizophrenic. That it's like, then you need like the diamond, you got like Brooklyn, What up, Brooklyn? And they got like a sign, there's like a sign. Everybody was doing it. I was like, what's this? I was doing it. I was like, what's this? And they were like, yeah, that's that Brooklyn shit. Right? And he had on like a hoodie, but it was like silk. And he had on this huge robe, but it wasn't gold no more. It was like all diamonds, like braided diamonds. And he had built the house he was rocking in. He kind of built it. And he looked around and he was like, this your house. Crowd went wild. This your house. And then he did that sign again. I was like, wow, is he like a Delta? It's like, is he a soror? It's like there's something I don't know. I'm pursuing Du Bois and asking him, was he an intellectual first? Du Bois, are you an intellectual first? Then a sociologist, then an activist? Or was he called to do something, then leaned on sociology, history, and the podium to enact his calling? I'm thinking about the Martins of the world, my two Martins, King Jr. and Martin Puryear. I'm thinking about Martin's social practice, thinking about Fanon's social practice and Jane Addams' social practice. I'm wondering if Jane could have gone to school to learn how to be a suffragist or an activist or a believer in the poor. If school or pre-existing label could have given her the capacity to have the tenacity to stand up against the policies of our country and demand sanitation and new structures for the living and for the humanities. What can inspire that? Like, I asked earlier, can you teach that? Can you teach a person to have tenacity, really? Can you teach a rich person to have compassion for the poor? I imagine that was, those Bible stories were trying to do that, and the Talmud, maybe. What inspires one to be an abolitionist, to leave a very comfortable post? I imagine that Du Bois, could have had a comfortable, reclusive kind of studio practice, if you will. Could have had a very nice studio practice. It's like, you gonna go to China again at 91? It is the deep longing for justice that creates justice. The hunger for God that creates the pure in spirit, and engagement with the real world that gives depth and breadth and courage and position. Can we teach you to read? Yeah. Can we learn you to speak good? can I give you purpose that when moved rightly so stirs the hearts and minds of people? Can't give you passion. And so I found myself, like, when I reflected on Du Bois, thinking a lot about, where does this come from? Like what would inspire a person so much that they would relentlessly, I'm like, how do you write that many letters by hand? So we've lost that. Like, it's like that thing that's like, today's conversations have made me ask again, like, who has the right to change things? And, you know, on my block, there were no takers, you know? So it's like, all right, well, I'll do what I can. It wasn't really overly ambitious work. It was really quite mundane, quite normal work. And it was a work that didn't really need a name. Pretty good with a rake. But then the project artistically got more and more complicated. I want to do something illegal in my house, illegal because a policy says that that's not the way that you're supposed to use a residential house. But I want to do this because this feels right. And then a lawyer says, well, Theaster, you can't do that because that house isn't zoned to do that. But I believe that this is what I should be doing in the house. And the lawyer, he's giving me a kind of truth, but he's also just giving me kind of an efficient response. Like efficient, like Theaster, why don't you just find a building that's already made to do public things in, then the headache of changing this building, which should not be public, into one that could be public, we don't have to deal with that. Because the lawyer was used to working with folk that were looking for efficiencies, and efficiencies meant that they were also, in the end, going to be able to make some money. But I'm saying, no. All I got is this house. There's no other grappling. There's nowhere else to go, because this house is $10,000. And we're going to show films in this house. And it's like, well, it's illegal unless you don't take money and you call it a, you know, these are your friends, and you don't advertise it, and you don't take Mr. Jones' parking spot. Because if you take Mr. Jones' parking spot, Mr. Jones is going to call the alderman. And then Mr. Jones is going to go to the next alderman meeting and say, now all these white people be coming to the neighborhood. And so I have to say to the lawyer, no. Isn't there a way that we could just change the zoning of the house? And it's like, oh, Theaster, yeah, I mean, I guess. But, you know, it's going to be very expensive. I mean, it's going to be hours of, you know, kind of like negotiating with the alderman about why, and, you know, this is a fairly common, it's like, but, you know, I can't afford the big commercial building on the main street. Culture can't afford itself in this neighborhood like that. Willing to turn this thing over and over and over again until something starts to click. You know, so we bought another building and another building. And now we're doing, I have my friends over in lots of buildings. Because I have a lot of friends. You know, you guys are all welcome. You know, and when my fancy friends want to have a party of a couple hundred people, and they could be doing it to raise a couple $1 million for the local museum. Don't nobody stop them from having, you know, a whole bunch of people over at their house to have, it's a fundraiser. Money's being exchanged. You know, it is a gathering. Champagne, they got like, their house is made to, you know, they got like an extra kitchen made for that kind of thing, like a servant's kitchen. They call it a service kitchen. Right? But we know about that here in Massachusetts. So just trying to match my conviction with my little house and a willingness to just not like bulldog, just like to stay on it long enough that the affect, that the impactfulness that you wanted starts to happen. and just not letting go. I mean, how many people have seen 12 Years a Slave? One or two? Oh, all right, I want to talk about it. There's a scene. This is Steve McQueen. I'm thinking the difference between Steve McQueen making a narrative, building a narrative around slavery, and Steven Spielberg. And one of the things that I left there thinking was that Steve McQueen, artist, right, who's mastered the 5-minute video, the 7-minute video, mastered audiences who are not sitting down, but audiences are standing up, and there's lots of stuff to look at next. That there's a scene near the opening that I won't talk about too much, but it had to do with time and a kind of reckoning with time, a willingness to linger in one place with one scene long enough that you didn't need words. You didn't need special effects. You didn't need extra to understand the impactfulness of this one image. And there's a way in which I think Dorchester is the kind of project where if I stay at it long enough, as all of these other things shift in my life, if I could stay local long enough, if I could plant my resources in one place long enough, if I could get my friends excited about this place where I live, if I could do that long enough, another kind of affect might occur. That people might understand that place differently because they can come back to it over and over again. That the scene that starts in daytime and continues through dusk, that you start to imagine that time is a funny part of a certain kind of practice. And some people who have time-based practices, they're like, okay, I'm going to sit on this ice for a day. It's a particular kind of durational practice. But what happens if you stay in a place that's been constantly left by others? If you stay there as your class status changes, you just stay there long enough. If you build your studio there. And why in the hell would I look out my studio and make pictures of poverty? I can't do it. Pay people off so that I might photograph them in their current state. Yeah, and I ain't no archaeologist, I'm not a anthropologist. I don't know how to be somewhere and beg my pardon. I'm just gonna observe. Just keep on hooting. It's hard to see the conditions of this world and not be moved to want to engage them. But that's the gift of black folk. That we're moved by things. We extroverts. Things affect us. They make us want to sing, make us want to pray, make us forgive. And, some white people have that, I guess. Just joking. Just joking. That if I have to spend $1 million on a public art piece, and I got to give that money to some fabricator somewhere, then why not try to imagine as part of the work of art that more of that money should be spent in my neighborhood? It's not to say that white Indiana fabricators don't deserve the work, because things are rough for white men and women in Indiana too. But I don't live in Indiana. And there's like a whole lot of economic injustice happening around me. Can I be fully mindful of the studio and fully mindful of the environment just outside the studio, and allow the environment outside the studio to be part of the equation. That I just kind of build that into the equation all the time when I'm making. It actually isn't that much harder. It's like, oh yeah. You know, public art in a train station plus my broke neighbors equals a significant work of art. You know, it ain't that much. It ain't that much more of a leap. And then probably the piece that makes it much more interesting is the fact that there is this extra thing to be bothered with. These Negroes. Seemingly unproductive, challenged, in need of vocation, the way Booker T would have loved for us, that we should just assign ourselves to things, commit to tilling and toiling, those things that we're familiar with. Should be the vocations. That brothers come all around, come all the time and say, look, man, I could sweep, I could just, whatever, And I try to imagine the courage and the humility and the frustration of having to come for a 50-plus-year-old brother to have to come to me and say, is there anything I can do around your building? And how could it be possible that in my 25,000 square foot warehouse, that when his brother comes and says, is there anything you can do, that I would say, nah, man, I ain't got no work. And I'm hiring these little white boys from the Art Institute. And it's like, well, if I gotta decide between the guy across the street from my 25,000 square foot studio, right? And so I'm trying to be real plain about race, right? So, a collector calls me and says, oh my God, Theaster, it's so good to hear from you. Great to hear you. My son is at the School of the Art Institute doing his MFA. We're so excited. We know you're busy. But our son was just thinking, if there was anything he could do, he'd love to be your intern, or my husband and I are really excited about this and would love to make a contribution to your foundation as a way of supporting our son. Right? The not-for-profits that are able to leverage young art historians that are in the middle of their MAs and PhDs, because those historians, for whatever reasons, don't need to make money. So they offer a free, we have a free internship fellowship opportunity. Well, who in the hell in my neighborhood can afford to give 30 hours a week to a free internship fellowship opportunity? And so it becomes an immediate hierarchy of who has access. So you pay the tithe. You do the 5 years of volunteering while you're finishing your PhD, and oh my God, there's an assistant curator position opening up. But it only pays $32,500. Now who in the hell can live off $32,500 when they got a baby or a life in New York? And so there's another set of subsidies that happen. And so I have to think about the needs of black people. Because, because a large portion of the art machine is rigged to not think about them. And all my white homies will be like, but Theaster, this is not about race. If they feel passionately about this, they'll figure out a way to do the 30 hours. Man, that is crazy. Am I a social practitioner? I'm not. I'm a dude that lives fully in the world. That I don't think about art all the time because I don't have the luxury of thinking about art all the time. I think about art 10% of my day when I'm on a plane. I am not thinking about art right now. I am not thinking about art. And I think that there really is a need to kind of complicate then what we teach. Because if we're training people to leave here and all they do is think about art, we're jacked. Where's Greg? Are you here? Is Greg here? Oh, there you go. Hey, Greg. That everything in me wants to believe that an artist should have the luxury of only making in the ways that they think about making. But it is a luxury to me. That if one was to just fully resign themselves, God bless them. And I need those people. Like when I'm home and I say, hey, Carrie, why don't you come through? Carrie James Marshall. Hey, Carrie, why don't you come through? Carrie's like, nah, man. I got the Successionist show. It's like, oh, what's the Successionist? He's like, oh, never mind. What's the Successionist? What's the? He's like, never mind. It's in Europe. Don't worry about it. That Carrie's thinking about the world, but he understands that the way that he thinks about the world is through his paintings. And so this social practice stuff, right, that the reason that I would want to affiliate Du Bois with this at all is because I'm attempting to say something else about the possibility that this thing that we may be framing as something pedagogical is really just more like a platform. That it's a way of imagining, now that I have a set of tools, in what way might I use them? And now that I have some resource, how do I want to be generous? Now that I have a sense of who God is, how do I want to share that? Now that I know how to make eyeglasses, who can I help see? That I'd be remiss for the architects and art historians, that if you guys put down your pencils and started hugging people and said, oh, this is great, let's just be together. And this togetherness is a form that, who needs skill when you got love? That you might be useless really soon to anybody's struggle. But if we could dig deeply into these core values, core disciplinary values, if we could just exhaust our learning, and then alongside that, figure out what the right mechanism for dispensation of that learning is. And when you look at things like Teach for America or study, these study abroad programs that are like shooting you out, you could imagine that as a platform for a kind of social dispensation. That Peace Corps as a mechanism took a whole bunch of folk that were interested in whatever they were interested in. Then the mechanism could ask, like, what are you interested in? And then it could deploy them, right? That Peace Corps was the apparatus by which a person who was interested in any old thing could potentially be useful somewhere else in the world. That as a mechanism becomes a mechanism by which social practice might play itself out. But please don't fail to become a mechanical engineer. God knows that we need the engineering as much as we need the hug. Thank you. Yeah, what are my thoughts on big politics, and how do I feel in this moment about big politics? So one of the things that I'm most excited about in my own artistic practice is people's inability to kind of really put a finger on what it is, and that feels like a political device to me. That the minute that I have to absolutely observe a platform, I think it stops being art. The minute that that I don't have the right to change my opinion, or that my opinion is dictated by the sense of a poll or a constituency, that I think it starts to slip into something else. And I think that there was a moment, I've been sharing that there was a moment when I felt our president was allowing himself to show a kind of radical politic, and in that moment, everybody that heard that in those speeches were immediately afraid for his life. That there's a way in which big politics, I feel like Google is big politics. Like say, I don't know if I would ever imagine myself as a politician, but I imagine that there are so many mechanisms by which the world is changed every day, and I'm actually interested in some of those more subversive but nonetheless large platforms for a certain kind of reimagination of politics. That is, like, wealthy people understand that if they can control media, like if they can buy the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, so that they might actually be able to kind of like shift a set of ideologies, and so they buy big, and that might be you might be better off spending your money buying the Washington Post than trying to become senator of state of Delaware or something. Fox, yes, Fox News, of course. And so I think that I'm suspicious of a certain kind of political platforming, even within artistic practice, or definitely within politics, but also within artistic practice. And so, am I nostalgic? Yeah, I mean, I read Said's Public Intellectual. I mean, like, I wish I knew Fred Hampton and we were like, ballers on the West Side or something. Like, yeah, I'm nostalgic right now. I mean, it's like, can't you tell I'm nostalgic? Like that there's something at stake, and I feel like the world we don't live like those women and men did. People who had like huge vision, So like, I mean, I think about Jane Addams a lot because I'm in Chicago, but like, she liked women, she was rich and kind of like, was willing to like live in that world a little bit and kind of stay connected to it and use that influence, but like also like do this other thing that like other wealthy white women were doing, was just like we're gonna live for something other than these like debutante balls and stuff. Yeah, I've been thinking about Jane Jacobs a lot. Like who takes on a city? Who takes on Montreal, Toronto, New York City? Who takes on the city and say that the way that you're imagining the future of this city is jacked? And they're like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Jane Jacobs. It's like, I'm a teacher or something like that. That kind of radical imagination, that citizenship in America actually meant something. And that when citizenship felt new and like it was the malleable thing that we had the ability to like, it was all that we had, and it was all that most people had, that then every once in a while but more than now, there would be a heroic citizen, just a normal person. But I think that kind of citizenry has been replaced by another kind of desire to be popular, which I also have. I have a desire to be liked, to be well thought of. And so maybe that is a kind of politics. Maybe I do have a constituency of believers. Maybe I do have a congregation, you know. But I don't want to be, I don't want to be some things, but I do want to be like Jane Addams. You know. And so maybe that's it. Maybe that's why I spend all my money on Dorchester. I'm like, well, she did it. You know, and you know, this is where I'm dumb. This is where I'm also dumb, in that I know that there are certain families in Chicago, and the money that they're spending is actually money that just helps them be efficient in their tax deductions. That they're not spending their essence, they're spending excess. But they make it look so good to say, you know, this is a gift of the Robert E. You know, like whatever they say, these things. Maybe to me, you know, a philanthropic baller is more interesting than like a rap star. So maybe I'm fashioning my life to be like them. I'm still chasing whiteness. I'm chasing wealth.
So if you're still chasing whiteness, and the model that you articulated is one of an artist who is able to accumulate a particular status by practicing and then redistributing to your own community. Why is that any different from what white people have been doing for centuries? Are there some other models that can be cultivated, other subjectivities, so that artists can comment?
So this is the fun part, because y'all just know me like this. Like, y'all know me post Art Forum article, right? But it's like, I'm 40 years old. So the 15 years of my freaking life, that was an attempt to create a platform by which I could dispensate the things that I was interested in. Nobody was looking. It's not to say that this is the first time that a project has incurred. This is just the first time that it was interesting or legible to anybody, or that the rest of you white people knew about it. Black people on the west side knew what I was doing 20 years ago. So that I think that we worked through a series of devices that, and I'm getting all worked up now. Don't be scared, John. I'm just loud. But that absolutely there are, that I'm only leveraging today for what today offers, and today ain't always looked like this. And I'm leveraging with the understanding that today changes. And tomorrow could look very different from today. And so in the moment when you can be impactful, that you be impactful. And I don't live with a certain conservatism because I ain't never had shit. So the extra money that moves, that gets distributed doesn't really mean anything yet. It'd be different if I was trying to protect my daddy's wealth. Well, my daddy didn't have shit. So my daddy's like, well, you're doing better than any of us have done ever. You should do what you want to do. What keys might there be for us here? I was at Harvard 2 weeks ago talking to a group of social entrepreneurs. And they were excited, and they were like insulin and like wheelbarrows and like Kenya, and they were like all like fired up. And I was like, have any of you like initiated a business? Like, have you applied for an LLC? And they were like, no, we're gonna, we thought we'd wait till we graduate, and and then I was like, well, why not just start an LLC? It's like, it's probably $400 in the state of New York or state of Massachusetts. You could, get it, and then while you're practicing, you could just do the thing. And they were like, there was a way in which the school was teaching them to practice. I'm like, well, if you really want to make the wheelbarrow, then just make the wheelbarrow. And then, but if you're going to make the wheelbarrow, you're going to need to understand the kind of legal structures by which you make the wheelbarrow and distribute the wheelbarrow. If there's anything that I have to say here is that the practicing should not only be about our artistic practice, that it should be about our humanity, and that we have to understand that our vision needs a platform, and that platform could take many modes. And so instead of thinking that I'm an architect who will get a good job, could you be an architect that starts a firm? And you'll probably make the same amount of money, which is nothing. And so if you know you're gonna make nothing, you may as well take a risk and make like a little bit more nothing or a little bit less nothing, but at least you're working 90 hours for something that you actually believe in. I think about that a lot. That I couldn't have imagined that a piece of fire hose or an old piece of wood or the roof of a building would have gotten people so wet that they would want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on those objects. But I understood enough about how that platform worked that I leveraged the hell out of it. And I believed in those objects. I believe in those objects. And I was also really comfortable with the fact that those objects would go to museums and to people's homes, and that people were leveraging the future value of that object, and so they bought them, they waited, and then they sold them. And when I was clear about that part of the art world, I realized that the people who were calling me up and asking if they could have a deal right out of my studio, that they were in fact just thinking about the market, and that I would leverage the fuck out of them like they were leveraging me. And that I could either spend my time asking the living Rockefellers to give me money from their foundation or to write me a check from their private checkbook. But that we were all in fact engaged in the same work, trying to figure out how to fund the struggle. And so there are times when hippie founders of not-for-profits will say, but Theaster, you're just a thus and so. What are you? That we're all really just good people with big ideas trying to figure out how best to make those, how to realize those ideas. And that when I think about the history of some of these large conglomerates, these large philanthropic entities, that they are a complicated sort. And if they have so much money, maybe someone somewhere a little bit maybe was a little bit exploited. And so we have to decide then how we position ourselves to do the work that we want to do. And we could position ourselves by saying, okay, well, I have my good day job and I make a goodly amount of money, and then I can use that money, I can fund myself, I can fund the revolution with my salary, which is how I built the first building. And if I didn't have the extra money that the art world sometimes affords, then it just means that I wouldn't be followed around by the New Yorker. I mean, the work wouldn't be any less or more, wouldn't be more or less meaningful. It would just be a little bit louder or a little quieter, I guess. But that's how it had been. I'll take one more question.
What's it like being followed around by the New Yorker?
My friend said that she thinks I like it. But I only like it a little bit. You know, lately people have been asking, how do you replicate the work? How do you replicate Dorchester? Or how do you take these ideas and turn them into a code? And they're ready to do that like McDonald thing. You know, they're like, oh yeah. And it's tough because it's like, well, if you give me $1 million and you know, MacArthur follows me around for 3 years, I'll tell you, I mean, we could replicate the hell out of it. It's very tempting. But I think one way of increasing awareness and creating opportunities so that people can see the model, and then that have, because that's what happened for me when I found out about Rick Lowe at Project Row Houses. When I was learning about Jeannie Gang and like architects that I admire, that I just read their stories and was really inspiring. And I was like, oh, I want to do this. So in a way, it feels like it ain't really about the New Yorker or about me, but it's like about how do you continue to catalyze a certain kind of enthusiasm for dirty work.
I kind of took it for granted that we all knew what happens in your projects and what goes on and how they're used by the community. What's actually happening? How are they being used on an ongoing basis?
Well, that's kind of like what a funder would ask. Like it has something to do with a metric in a way. A metric.
No, I just want to know how they're being used.
Okay. Black Cinema House shows films 3 days a week. And we have a film club at the local middle school. And the film club meets twice a week. And we teach them how to film on one day and edit on the other. And then they screen their films at Black Cinema House. Sometimes famous people come through, like Melvin Van Peebles was there a little while ago. And it's like, we made some collard greens and he wanted some neck bones and some black eyed peas. And we invited our neighbors plus a couple fancy people and then some people Melvin knew. But we use the spaces to gather in that way. And then Black Cinema House was honored by the Black Harvest Film Festival as like the most innovative new space in the country. It legitimately holds 30 people. We sometimes have 50 people there. But it's really just a old 2-flat rehabbed, and it screens films. There's a nice screen that comes out of the ceiling or something like that. $75,000 worth of infrastructure to make this building that cost a lot of money to rehab a cultural space for that neighborhood. The Listening House houses these albums. Archive House houses Prairie Avenue Bookstore, this art and architecture bookstore. And there are other things, the slides and stuff. And on Sundays, we have open Sundays, where we have a team of programmers who are activating all those things. So we have a book club and a poetry club that uses the Johnson periodicals and library as the fodder for their poems and stuff like that. We have some DJs that are wedded to Dr. Wax, and then we play music and we make food. We have a garden in the back. 4 spaces are public spaces. 4 buildings are housing for people who are visiting from around the country and world to be on the block with us. They work with us, and I give them free rent, and they work. And then another 6 buildings are rental units that have a below market rate rent. Around the corner are 32 units that are being rehabbed. There's a commercial building that's a large bank. It's about 17,000 square feet. It'll be a repository for books. A small restaurant. The Washington Park Arts Incubator has a residency program and an exhibition space. In the last 4 years, maybe I've spent $6 million of my money and about $25 million of aggregated money, including tax credits and that the kind of impact of university support. And I think now the city's very supportive, and the philanthropic community is kind of teed up, but I had to kind of make a $6 million case, essentially, to suggest that this black neighborhood was important and that good things could come if that investment was made. So the part that I was kind of hearing, and not exactly what you said, the part that I was hearing was that I don't really have the burden even still of saying that I've been a certain kind of impactful. It's like, this is what's happening. But it has been impactful. But that ain't why I did it, because I thought maybe this would be impactful. I did it because I was making the case that someone should do it. That good things and beautiful things should happen there. That I wasn't leaving, and I like beautiful things and good things. And so since I ain't moving, I gotta play my role as a citizen to try to make those good things happen. So now I have a place where I can watch movies and my homies come over. I don't even have to call them because there's a whole group of people that call my homies, and they just show up at my house, and I go home and there's all these people there. And I didn't have to call them. It's really great. It's really fun. Yeah.
One word keeps coming up to me, which is sanctuary.
Sanctuary.
So I just wanted to throw that out and see if you would reflect on it. And then when you were answering another question, I became curious about whether there's some part of your practice that you feel is not up for being leveraged, and where that is or how you describe that. And then, because this is something that I'm asking myself as an artist in my practice, I would just be curious for you where grace is.
Those three questions feel really wonderfully connected. Kind of the idea of sanctuary, and then sanctuary being a place where you don't have to leverage anything. It's your kind of respite. In church, there was in my church, there was you come in and it's that's where the congregation is, and then you go, and then there's a pulpit there, and then you go, and then maybe the pastor's study is in the back. Sometimes I build sanctuaries, and sometimes I build them where they're not supposed to be, because I believe that to make a place sacred is actually not that difficult. It just requires that a person believes that a place should be sacred, and then a group of people believe with her that a place is sacred, and then you're at sanctuary. And that one way that we can aestheticize or celebrate or kind of put some human ego on sanctuary is that, in addition to our belief, we could then trick it out and say, oh, no, I'm going to build the most beautiful sanctuary for God. We're really building for ourselves, building it for the people to kind of show how much we love God, or how big we can build buildings or whatever. But that sanctuary then it moves from belief to a kind of activated construction. It's like a kind of architecture. So I feel like that in a way these talks are also trying to get at that they may call us home to Sheboygan Falls or Altoona, Iowa, or they might call us back to Cedar Rapids or Newark. They would encourage us to do this work of kind of rebuilding the temple. I don't know, we ain't got to talk about temple rebuilding in that. There are parts that can't be leveraged, and I don't talk about them. And there are parts of my life that are public, and then there are parts that ain't none of my business, let alone that there are things that don't make sense to me. But that operating system, I'm glad it's in there, and as a result, I can sometimes understand the output more than I understand the motivation behind the output. I say to myself, why am I spending all my money like this? But calling helps me understand that's the work to be done, and then sometimes it's only after the work has been done, not unlike a work of art, that it starts to make sense to us. That I can't fail to take the risk. So some things shouldn't be leveraged. And then, I was having a conversation earlier with colleagues about, do I recognize that sometimes I'm complicit with very complicated forces, like an affiliation with the university, or a political affiliation with the city, or being named an artist for an art fair that does XYZ, that's trying to get, or being a gallery, going to White Cube and having a certain kind of practice, and then allowing my London gallery to kind of covet my place as a certain kind of practitioner to make their capitalist enterprise look a little bit better. That in all those things, Theaster is not ignorant of himself or the structures by which he's being leveraged. And I am also leveraging, but also there are moments when those words go away, and it's like, oh, no, Jay Jopling's actually the most upright dude I know, even though he happens to be a really good capitalist. He's the most decent human I've met in a long time. And maybe money affords him the opportunity to be more decent, because he ain't worried about this meal or the next. I have a friend named Grace. She's really nice. And I knew this from religion, that the people who seem to know God best were the people who had done so much bad stuff in the world, and they felt forgiven by God. That there was a way in which grace was bigger for them because they needed to be forgiven for so much more, right? That one way of understanding grace is by understanding the kind of limitations of humanity, the failures. I used to be very mad at white people and very, very mad at the black middle class. But it's been interesting to watch over time friends of all kinds say, I'm really actually glad you kept doing that thing. Let me know how I can be helpful. And it's 5 or 6 years in, and a part of me just wants to say, I don't need your help. And you just want to co-sign so that you can be in my New Yorker article. But there's a way in which the project seems even more heroic to them because they saw it when it was nothing. And it's just important that if it really is about the work, if that is the calling, and not necessarily Dorchester. Dorchester is the kind of emblem of the work, but the work is to just work. That if there's grace in that, then it just means that the work just keeps amplifying and amplifying until it's run its course. And then hopefully it can gracefully run its course. And then I know when it's over. Thank you guys very much.